My name is Sloane Prescott. I am 29 years old. On a bright Saturday afternoon in mid-June, I stood on the flagstone patio of my parents' house in Savannah, Georgia, holding a glass of sweet tea. I had no intention of drinking, and I watched a flatbed tow truck with the words, Coastal Recovery Services painted on the side, turn slowly off Habersham Street and begin its long, unhurried crawl up the live, oak-lined driveway toward 83 people who had gathered to celebrate my younger brother Colton's departure for law school. The Porsche Macan, Arctic Silver, 22-inch sport wheels. The $68,500 graduation gift my parents had presented to him 6 weeks earlier with a red bow on the hood and a crowd of applauding relatives was parked in the center of the circular drive like a sculpture on display. Colton was standing beside it with a drink in his hand, laughing at something his roommate had said, his tie loosened, his blazer draped across the passenger seat. He did not see the truck. Not yet. My mother, Catherine, was arranging canapes on a linen-covered table near the garden gate. My father, Martin, was holding court beside the fountain with two of his business partners, gesturing broadly with his bourbon, performing the role of proud patriarch the way he performed everything, loudly, confidently, and without the slightest suspicion that anything in his carefully constructed world was about to change. I took one sip of sweet tea. I set the glass down on the stone ledge. I folded my hands in front of me. And I waited. What none of them knew, not my parents, not Colton, not any of the 83 guests eating shrimp and drinking champagne on a lawn my mother had hired 3 people to manicure, was that the money used to buy that car had been stolen from me, taken from a medical trust my dying grandmother had set up to keep me alive. And for the last 5 months, while they toasted Colton's future and told each other how proud they were, I had been building the legal case that would bring that truck up the driveway at exactly 3:47 p.m., on the day the largest possible audience would be watching. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I didn't have to. This is that story. The Prescott family of Savannah, Georgia. That is how we were known in the neighborhoods that mattered to my mother. In the country club dining rooms where my father conducted business. In the pews of Christ Church on Bull Street where we sat every Easter in coordinated outfits my mother selected in February. Martin Prescott, my father, was 56 years old and had spent the last 28 of those years building Prescott & Associates, a regional insurance brokerage that handled commercial policies for mid-market businesses across the Lowcountry. He was the kind of man who shook hands firmly, remembered your wife's name, played 9 holes on Wednesday afternoons, and believed with absolute certainty that the world owed him its respect because he had earned it. He drove a black Mercedes S-Class. He wore monogrammed cuffs. He donated to the Children's Hospital every December and made sure the local paper printed his name. He was not a cruel man in the way that movies portray cruelty. He was something more common and more difficult to name. A man who had decided, very early and very permanently, which of his children mattered. I want to give you 3 examples so you understand the architecture of this before I tell you what happened next. When I was 14 and Colton was 7, I won the regional science fair with a project on insulin resistance in type 1 diabetics. My teacher, Mrs. Muddance Halliday, called my parents to tell them I had been selected to present at the state competition in Atlanta. My father's response, relayed to me through my mother over dinner that evening, was, "That is nice, honey. Do we have to drive to Atlanta? That is a long drive." I did not go to the state competition. Nobody drove me. 2 years later, when Colton scored the game-winning touchdown in a Pee-wee football game against a team from Rincon, my father drove 45 minutes each way, stood on the sideline in the rain, and then took the entire team out for pizza at Vinnie Van Gogh's on West Bryan Street. He spent $412 on pizza for 12 7-year-olds and their parents. I know the amount because my mother mentioned it 3 times that week as evidence of what a generous father Martin was. When I was 20 and needed an emergency room visit at 2 in the morning because my blood sugar dropped to 37 and I could not stop shaking, I called my parents from the hospital. My father answered. He said, "Are you okay?" I said yes. He said, "Good. Call us in the morning. I have a 7 o'clock tea time." When Colton broke his wrist playing intramural lacrosse his freshman year at Georgia, both parents drove 4 hours to Athens, stayed 3 nights at the Holiday Inn Express, and brought him home with a care package that included a new PlayStation, a heating pad, and a handwritten card from my mother that read, "You are our warrior." I did not resent Colton for any of this. I want to be clear about that. Colton did not create the system. He was simply its primary beneficiary, and he was too young and too comfortable to notice the difference. Catherine Prescott, my mother, was 53. She had been a pageant girl in Beaufort County, third runner-up Miss South Carolina 1991, and she carried the memory of that stage with her into every room she entered for the rest of her life. She was beautiful in the way that women who have spent decades maintaining their beauty become beautiful. Precisely, effortfully, with a discipline that most people mistook for natural grace. She chaired the Junior League Auxiliary. She organized the annual Telfair Art Fair silent auction. She kept a house that smelled of gardenias and fresh paint, and the particular brand of controlled warmth that made guests feel welcome while making her own daughter feel like a guest. Catherine's love was not absent, it was allocated. And the allocation had been decided before I was old enough to understand its terms. Colton Andrew Prescott was 22, 7 years younger than me, born when I was in second grade, delivered into this family like a correction, the son my father had wanted, the heir my mother could dress in seersucker and parade through garden parties. Colton was 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, effortlessly charming in the way that people who have never been denied anything learn to be charming. He had graduated from the University of Georgia that May with a 3.4 GPA in political science, and he had been accepted to Emory University School of Law, which my father announced at a dinner party 3 days after the acceptance letter arrived, as though Colton had been appointed to the Supreme Court. "My son," Martin said that night, standing at the head of the table with his bourbon raised, "is going to be the first Prescott to practice law, and I have no doubt he will be the best damn attorney this city has ever seen." Everyone clapped. I was sitting at the far end of the table, between my Aunt Lorraine and a cousin whose name I cannot remember, and I smiled and clapped along with everyone else because that is what I had learned to do. I need to tell you about my body, because my body is the center of this story in a way that most people in my family preferred not to acknowledge. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 11 years old, November 14, 2007. I remember the date because it was a Wednesday and I had been looking forward to a field trip to the Savannah History Museum the following day, and instead I woke up in a hospital bed at Memorial Health with an IV in my arm and a blood glucose reading of 412. My mother was in the chair beside me. She was crying. My father was in the hallway on the phone. When the endocrinologist, Dr. Anand Mehta, explained what type 1 diabetes meant, that my pancreas had stopped producing insulin, that this was permanent, that I would need injections multiple times a day for the rest of my life, that without consistent management this disease could take my eyesight, my kidneys, my feet, my life. My mother held my hand and whispered, "We will figure this out, sweetheart." And to her credit, for a while they did. But there is a difference between managing a crisis and managing a life. The crisis was dramatic. The hospital stay, the new vocabulary, the learning curve of syringes and carb counts and glucometers. My parents rose to that. It was visible. It was something they could talk about at dinner parties. "Our Sloane is so brave," Catherine would say, and people would nod sympathetically, and my parents would feel the particular warmth that comes from performing sacrifice in front of an audience. But the life, the daily, invisible, expensive, exhausting reality of being chronically ill, was not dramatic. It was tedious. It was a $2,700 insulin pump that needed replacing every 4 years. It was continuous glucose monitor sensors at $340 a box. It was quarterly endocrinology appointments at $185 after insurance. It was the fact that even with coverage, my out-of-pocket costs ran between $8,000 and $12,000 a year, every year for the rest of my life. And over time, my parents stopped talking about it at dinner parties. They stopped asking how I was managing. They stopped noticing. My grandmother noticed. Vivian Prescott, my father's mother, a woman who had grown up picking cotton in Jessup, Georgia, married a tire salesman, buried him at 51, and then spent the next 30 years building a small real estate portfolio that nobody in the family fully understood until the day her accountant read the numbers aloud in a conference room. Vivian noticed everything. She noticed that when I was 15 and my insulin pump failed during a family vacation in Hilton Head, my father's first response was, How much is this going to cost? She noticed that when I was 19 and my insurance denied coverage for my continuous glucose monitor, my parents did not help me with the appeal. She noticed that Colton got a brand new Ford F-150 for his 16th birthday, and I got a used Honda Civic with 114,000 miles on it for mine. Vivian never said anything to my parents about these observations. She was not a confrontational woman. She was a woman who kept her counsel and moved her pieces quietly. In September of 2019, 6 months before she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, Vivian called me and asked me to meet her at her attorney's office in downtown Savannah. I was 22. I drove the 30 minutes from my apartment wondering what she wanted. I sat down in a leather chair across from her and a man named Warren Halstead, an estate attorney with gray temples and a measured voice. And she told me what she had done. "I have set up a trust," she said. $87,400. It is in your name. It is specifically designated for your medical expenses. Your parents are named as trustees because you are under 25, but the terms of the trust are very clear. This money is for your insulin, your pump, your monitoring equipment, your specialist appointments, and nothing else. When you turn 25, you become your own trustee. She looked at me with those steady brown eyes. "I have watched your parents, Sloane. I love my son. But I have watched him, and I want to make sure you are taken care of." I cried. I sat in that leather chair in Warren Halstead's office, and I cried in a way I had not allowed myself to cry in front of anyone in years. Vivian handed me a tissue. She did not cry. She simply waited the way she always did, with the patience of a woman who understood that the most important things in life require time. Vivian died on March 8, 2020. I held her hand in the hospice room at Candler Hospital at 6:11 in the morning, while my father stood at the window looking out and my mother sat in the hallway answering emails on her phone. Colton was not there. He had a fraternity event. I whispered, "Thank you, Grandma." I do not know if she heard me. The monitor flatlined at 6:13. I let go of her hand at 6:14. I sat there for 7 more minutes before I stood up and walked out. My father did not look at me as I passed. For the next 4 years, the trust worked exactly as Vivian had designed it. I drew from it quarterly pump supplies, sensor refills, endocrinology copays. The occasional emergency room visit when my blood sugar crashed at 2 in the morning and I could not stabilize it alone. The balance declined steadily but sustainably. By January of 2024, the trust held approximately $31,600, enough for roughly 3 more years of care if I was careful. I was always careful. On February 9, 2025, a Sunday cold for Savannah. 41 degrees when I woke up. I logged into the trust portal to check the balance before scheduling my quarterly endocrinology appointment with Dr. Mehta. I typed my password. I waited for the page to load. The number that appeared on the screen was $412.16. I stared at it for 11 seconds. I counted. Then I refreshed the page. $412.16. I clicked the transaction history tab. The screen loaded slowly, the way screens do when they are about to deliver news your body already understands before your mind catches up. December 19, 2024. Withdrawal. $31,187.84. Authorized trustee, Martin Prescott. Purpose field, left blank. I did not call my father that day. I did not call my mother. I sat on my apartment floor, with my laptop balanced on my knees, and I read the trust documents Vivian's attorney had given me 6 years earlier. Every word, every clause, every restriction. Section 4, Paragraph 2. Disbursements from this trust shall be used exclusively for the medical care, treatment, and health-related expenses of the beneficiary. Sloane Elizabeth Prescott. No disbursement shall be made for any other purpose. Section 6, Paragraph 1. The trustee shall exercise fiduciary responsibility in accordance with the laws of the state of Georgia and shall be personally liable for any misappropriation of trust funds. I read those paragraphs 3 times. I closed the laptop. I sat in silence for 45 minutes. Then I got dressed, drove to my parents' house, and walked through the front door without knocking. The Porsche was in the driveway. I had seen it on Colton's Instagram 3 weeks earlier. A reel of him picking it up from the dealership, my father beside him, both of them grinning, the caption reading "Law School Ready" with a flexing arm emoji. I had watched that reel at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night, lying in bed with my continuous glucose monitor beeping a low battery warning on my nightstand, and I had felt something settle in my chest that was quieter and heavier than anger. My parents were in the kitchen. Catherine was arranging flowers. Martin was reading the journal on his iPad. Colton was not home. I stood in the doorway and said, "I need to talk to you about Grandma's trust." My father looked up. He did not look surprised. He looked mildly inconvenienced, the way he looked when a lawn service arrived late. "What about it?" he said. "The balance is $412, I said. "It was $31,000 in December. Where did the money go?" My mother stopped arranging flowers. She set down the shears. She looked at my father. He took a breath, set the iPad on the counter and said, in the same tone he used when explaining why he could not attend my college graduation, matter of fact, slightly bored, as though the conversation were beneath him, "We used it for Colton's graduation gift. He needed a reliable car for Atlanta. The Porsche was a good deal. We got it pre-owned certified, saved almost $9,000 off sticker." I let those words sit in the kitchen air for exactly 5 seconds. "That money was for my insulin," I said. "That money was for my medical equipment. Grandma set it up specifically for that." My mother spoke then. She had been quiet, but when she talked, her voice carried the careful, rehearsed quality of someone who had already prepared her lines. "Sloane, honey, you have insurance. You have always managed just fine. Colton is starting a new chapter and he needed support. We made a judgment call. You are 29 years old. You will figure it out. You always do. You will figure it out. You always do." I have turned that sentence over in my mind more times than I can count, and every time I arrive at the same conclusion. That is not a compliment. That is a confession. It is a family telling you, in the clearest possible language, that they have assigned you the role of person who does not need help, and they have built their entire system on the assumption that you will continue to play it. I did not yell. I did not cry. I looked at my mother, then at my father, and I said, "Thank you for being honest." Then I turned around, walked back through the front door, got in my car, and drove to Warren Halstead's office. It was a Sunday. I called his emergency line. He answered on the second ring. I told him everything. The silence on the other end of the phone lasted 8 seconds. Then he said, "Sloane, what your father did is a felony in the state of Georgia. Misappropriation of trust funds, breach of fiduciary duty. And the trust language Vivian drafted is ironclad. I wrote it specifically to prevent this." I said, "I know you did." He said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to do exactly what Grandma would have done. I want to be patient, and I want to be precise, and I want to make sure that when this is over, every single person who needs to understand what happened understands it completely." That was the moment I stopped being the daughter who figured it out and started becoming the woman who made them figure it out. Warren Halstead filed the initial trust violation complaint with the Chatham County Probate Court on February 18, 2025. Case number 2025 PT0417. The filing was sealed, which meant my parents received no notification. Under Georgia Code Section 5312-180, a trustee who misappropriates funds designated for a specific beneficiary is liable for full restitution plus statutory damages. Warren explained this to me in his office on a Tuesday afternoon while I sat across from him taking notes in a spiral-bound notebook I had bought at the Walgreens on Drayton Street for $3.49. "The car was purchased with trust funds," he said. "That makes the vehicle itself a traceable trust asset. Under the Uniform Trust Code, we can petition for the recovery of the asset directly," meaning the car. I looked up from my notebook. "You mean we can take the Porsche?" "I mean the court can order the seizure of the Porsche as a converted trust asset, yes. And given the language of Vivian's trust and the clear prohibition on non-medical disbursements, I do not see a judge in Chatham County who would deny the petition." I closed the notebook. I sat for a moment. "How long?" 60 to 90 days if we move efficiently." Faster if we can demonstrate that the beneficiary's medical care is being materially impacted by the misappropriation. I opened my bag and took out a manila folder. Inside were the last 4 months of my medical bills, the insulin I had paid for out of pocket at $1140 per month, the continuous glucose monitor sensors I had rationed by wearing each one 2 days beyond its recommended life, the endocrinology appointment I had canceled in January because I could not afford the copay. Warren looked through the folder. He did not speak for almost a full minute. Then he said, quietly, "Vivian would be furious." Over the next 5 months, I did 3 things simultaneously. First, I worked with Warren to build the legal case. We obtained the trust transaction records, the Porsche purchase agreement from the dealership. Chatham Motor Works on Abercorn Street, sold to Martin Prescott on December 20th, 2024, for $68,500. $28,000 financed through a lender and the remaining $40,500 paid in cash from, and this is stated explicitly on the payment record, a family trust account. Martin had not even bothered to disguise it. Second, I managed my diabetes on a budget that would have horrified my endocrinologist. I switched to a less effective but cheaper insulin. I wore my glucose monitor sensors for 3 days past their expiration. I skipped 2 specialist appointments. I spent $873 out of pocket in March alone. Money I took from the small savings account I had been building from my work as a freelance medical billing consultant. Work I had started 3 years earlier from my kitchen table. Work my parents knew nothing about and had never asked about. There were nights, and I want to tell you about this because it matters, when I would lie in bed at 1:30 or 2 in the morning and feel the particular slow dread of a blood sugar drop, beginning. The shaking starts in your fingers first, then the sweat, then the confusion, which is the worst part, because the confusion means your brain is being deprived of glucose and the thing you need most, the ability to think clearly enough to save yourself, is the thing the disease takes first. On March 22 at 1:47 a.m., I woke up on my kitchen floor. I do not remember walking there. My glucose monitor read 41. I ate 3 glucose tablets and drank half a carton of orange juice and sat on the linoleum floor with my back against the refrigerator for 20 minutes until the shaking stopped. Marin, my cat, sat beside me the entire time and put her paw on my knee, which is something she does when she senses something is wrong. The insulin I had been rationing to save money had caused the drop. The insulin my grandmother's trust was supposed to pay for. I sat on that floor at 2 in the morning and I thought about the Porsche sitting in my parents' driveway with its 22-inch sport wheels and its Arctic silver paint. And I thought about the $68,500 that could have covered my medical expenses for the next 6 years. And I did not cry. I took a slow breath. I stood up. I washed my face. And I opened my laptop and sent 2 new client proposals for my billing consulting work before I went back to bed. Third, and this is the part that mattered most, I began building my business in earnest. I had been doing medical billing consulting on a small scale since 2022, helping uninsured and underinsured patients navigate the labyrinth of claims, denials, appeals, and payment plans that the American healthcare system drops on people who are already sick and exhausted. I was good at it, not because I had studied it formally, but because I had lived it. I understood what it felt like to stare at a bill you could not pay for medication you could not live without. I understood the language of denial letters and the specific bureaucratic choreography required to reverse them. By March of 2025, I had 11 regular clients. By April, I had 19. By May, I had incorporated as Prescott Patient Advocacy LLC, registered with the state of Georgia, and signed a contract with a mid-size primary care practice in Pooler to handle all of their patient billing disputes on retainer for $4,200 per month. I built it in silence. My parents did not know. Colton did not know. I did not post about it on social media. I did not mention it at the single-family dinner I attended during that period, Easter, April 20th, during which my father talked about Colton's law school orientation for 47 straight minutes and did not ask me a single question about my life. I sat at that table and I ate my mother's roasted lamb and I counted 47 minutes about Colton, 0 about me. I was not angry. I was precise. On May 6, 2025, Warren Halstead received the signed order from Judge Patricia Langford of the Chatham County Probate Court. Order number 2025 PT0417-R. The order authorized the recovery of the Porsche Macan, VIN number WP1AB29Y7, Astor Race A 76421, as a traceable trust asset purchased with misappropriated funds. The order further required Martin Prescott to appear before the court within 30 days to address the fiduciary violation and potential criminal referral. I held that order in my hands in Warren's office, and I read it twice. Then I looked up and said, "When can the recovery be executed?" Warren leaned back in his chair. "Anytime. The order is effective immediately. You choose when." I already knew when. My mother had been planning Colton's law school send-off party for 3 months. She had rented a white tent. She had ordered catering from Elizabeth's on 37th Street, shrimp and grits, she crab soup, bourbon pecan tartlets, the full Savannah spread. She had sent 85 invitations on cream card stock with gold-embossed lettering. The party was scheduled for June 14, 2025 at 2 p.m. at the Prescott family home on Habersham Street. Everyone would be there. My father's business partners. My mother's junior league friends. Extended family from Beaufort, Charleston, and Atlanta. And the Porsche, the crown jewel, the symbol of everything the Prescott family believed it was, would be parked in the center of the driveway for everyone to admire. I called Coastal Recovery Services on June 2nd. I spoke with a man named Dale Ropichos, an operations manager with a Cajun accent and a direct manner. I explained the situation. I gave him the court order number. He verified it with the clerk of court's office while I waited on the line. I could hear him typing. The quiet click of a keyboard in a small office somewhere in Chatham County. Then he said, "Ma'am, we can execute this recovery whenever you're ready. You just tell me where and when," I said. June 14th, 3:45 p.m. 22 Habersham Street. The vehicle will be parked in the front driveway. There will be a large number of people present. Dale paused for exactly 2 seconds. "Understood," he said. "We will be there," I said. "Thank you, Dale." He said, "Yes, ma'am." If you are still watching this story right now, I want you to pause for a moment and think about someone in your own life who took something from you, not because they needed it, but because they believed you would let them. A parent who redirected your inheritance. A sibling who took credit for your work. A partner who spent your savings on themselves while telling you to be patient. If you know that feeling, drop a comment below and tell me one word that describes what it felt like. One word. I read every single comment on this channel and I want to hear yours. And if you have not already, please subscribe, because the rest of this story is the part I have been waiting to tell. June 14, 2025. 2 p.m. I arrived at my parents' house wearing a sage green linen dress I had bought with money I earned from my own business. My hair was pulled back. My continuous glucose monitor was discreetly taped to my upper arm beneath the sleeve, the same sensor I had been wearing for 5 days past its recommended replacement date. Because I was still covering costs my grandmother's trust was supposed to handle. I checked my blood sugar in the car before I walked in. 123. Stable. I took a breath. I opened the door. I walked through the gate and into the backyard. The tent was white and immaculate. The tables were draped in ivory linen. There were hydrangeas in crystal vases. String lights were threaded through the oak branches. It was beautiful. My mother had outdone herself, as she always did when the performance mattered. Colton was standing near the bar in a navy blazer and khakis, surrounded by friends from Georgia, holding a glass of something amber, laughing with the easy confidence of a 22-year-old who has never once had to wonder whether he could afford his next meal. My father was beside the fountain with 2 partners from his brokerage, Ed Carmichael and Jeff Boykin, telling them about Colton's LSAT score, which he had mentioned so many times in the last 6 months that even his business partners had stopped pretending to be impressed. My mother saw me first. She crossed the lawn with a glass of champagne in one hand and kissed my cheek. "Sloane, honey, you look lovely. Are you feeling all right?" "You look a little pale." "I feel fine, Mom, thank you." "Good. Grab a plate. The shrimp and grits are divine." She floated away. I found a chair near the edge of the tent. I sat. I checked my watch. 2:17 p.m. I had 1 hour and 28 minutes. At 3:15, my father took the small stage my mother had set up beneath the oak tree. He tapped the microphone. "Excuse me, everyone. If I could have your attention." The crowd gathered. 83 people. I counted. My father launched into a speech about Colton, his character, his ambition, his bright future. "When Colton was 7 years old," Martin said, "he told me he wanted to be a lawyer." I laughed. He was 7. But he was serious. And today, I am standing here telling you that my son is heading to one of the finest law schools in this country, and I could not be more proud. The crowd applauded. Colton stood near the stage, shaking his head modestly, his hands in his pockets, performing humility the way our father had taught him. My mother was beaming. My father continued. "Catherine and I wanted to make sure Colton started this chapter the right way, so we surprised him with something special." He gestured toward the driveway. The Arctic silver Porsche gleamed in the afternoon sun. "That right there is the car of a future attorney." More applause. Laughter. Colton raised his glass. "Thanks, Dad. I promise I will make you proud." I did not clap. I sat in my chair with my hands folded in my lap. I checked my watch. 3:31 p.m., 14 minutes. At 3:43 p.m., I stood up from my chair. I walked to the edge of the tent where I had a clear sight line down the driveway to Habersham Street. At 3:45, I saw it. The Coastal Recovery flatbed turning slowly off the main road, Dale Robichaux behind the wheel, the hydraulic ramp already positioned for loading. It moved up the driveway at approximately 5 miles per hour. Slowly enough to be noticed. Quickly enough to be purposeful. The first person to see it was Jeff Boykin, who set his drink down and said, "Martin, is that a tow truck?" My father turned. His expression moved through 3 phases in approximately 4 seconds. Confusion, annoyance, and then something I had never seen on his face before. Recognition. Not of the truck. Of the situation. Of the fact that something was happening that he had not planned for and could not control. Dale Robichaux stepped out of the cab. He was a large man, calm, professional, wearing a gray polo with the Coastal Recovery logo on the breast pocket. He carried a clipboard. He walked directly to the Porsche. Colton stepped forward. "Excuse me, what are you doing? That is my car." Dale looked at his clipboard. "Are you Martin Prescott?" "I am Martin Prescott," my father said, stepping forward. His voice was loud now, the voice he used when he wanted a room to know he was in charge. "What is the meaning of this?" Dale handed him a document from the clipboard. "Sir, I am executing a court-ordered asset recovery pursuant to Chatham County Probate Court Order number 2025 PT0417-R, signed by Judge Patricia Langford. This vehicle has been identified as a traceable trust asset purchased with misappropriated funds. I am authorized to recover it immediately." The patio went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The particular silence that falls over a crowd of people who have just collectively realized that the story they are watching is not the story they thought they came to see. My father's face drained of color. He looked at the document. He looked at Dale. He looked at the truck. Then he looked at me. I was standing at the edge of the tent. My hands were folded. My face was still. I did not look away. My mother's voice cut across the lawn. "Martin? Martin, what is going on? Who is this man?" She crossed the grass quickly, her heels sinking into the turf. She grabbed my father's arm. She read the document over his shoulder. I watched her read it. I watched her eyes move down the page and stop. She looked up at me. Her mouth opened. No words came out. Colton looked back and forth between the truck, the Porsche, and our parents. "Dad, what is he talking about? What trust? What funds?" I stepped forward then. I did not raise my voice. I spoke at exactly the volume the situation required, loud enough for the people nearest to hear, quiet enough that it felt private even though it was not. "The trust Grandma Vivian set up for my medical care," I said. $87,400. Designated exclusively for my insulin, my pump, my doctor's appointments. Dad withdrew the last 31,000 in December and used it to buy your car. I paused. I had been rationing my insulin for 5 months. Colton's face changed, not the way my father's had. Not with the shock of being caught. With something else, something slower. The beginning of understanding. He looked at our father. "Dad," he said. "Is that true?" My father said nothing. He was still holding the court order. His hand was trembling. My mother spoke. "Sloane, this is not the time or the place for this. You are embarrassing this family." I looked at her. "No, Mom," I said. "You bought a Porsche with money that was keeping me alive. I am just making sure the right people know." Aunt Lorraine, my mother's sister, stood up from her table. Her face was white. "Catherine," she said in a voice that carried across the lawn, "tell me she is not saying what I think she is saying." Catherine did not answer. She was staring at me with an expression I had seen only once before. The morning Vivian died, when she realized the woman she had spent 30 years performing for was no longer there to be performed for. Dale Robichaux, with the unhurried professionalism of a man who had executed many such recoveries, positioned the flatbed's ramp behind the Porsche. He asked if anyone had the keys. No one moved. The lawn was completely still. I could hear the fountain gurgling behind my father. I could hear someone's champagne glass being set down on a table with a small, careful click. Ed Carmichael, my father's longest-standing business partner, took 2 steps backward as though proximity itself had become compromising. His wife put her hand on his arm and whispered something, and they both looked at the ground. Colton reached into his blazer, which was still draped across the passenger seat. He pulled out the key fob. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he walked over to me and held it out. "I did not know," he said quietly. "I believe you," I said. He placed the key in my hand. I walked it to Dale Robichaux and set it on his clipboard. "Thank you, Dale," I said. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He loaded the Porsche in 4 minutes and 12 seconds. The crowd watched in silence. When the flatbed pulled down the driveway and turned back onto Habersham Street, my father sat down heavily in the nearest chair. My mother followed the truck with her eyes until it disappeared behind the oaks. Nobody was eating shrimp and grits anymore. I did not stay. I said goodbye to Aunt Lorraine, who hugged me and whispered, "Vivian would be so proud of you." I said goodbye to 2 cousins who had come from Charleston, and who looked at me with a combination of shock and something that might have been respect. I did not say goodbye to my parents. I did not say goodbye to Colton. I walked to my car, the same Honda Civic with 172,000 miles on it that I had been driving since I was 16, and I drove home. My father called me 4 hours later at 7:52 p.m. I let it ring 5 times before I answered. His voice was different. Smaller, stripped of the performance, the bourbon confidence replaced with something raw and uncomfortably honest. "Sloane," he said, "I need to talk to you." "I am listening," I said. "I made a mistake," he said. "I know I made a mistake. I should not have touched that money. But you have to understand. Colton needed a car, and the trust was just sitting there, and I thought, you thought I would figure it out," I said. "You thought I would do what I always do. Manage. Adapt. Find a way. Because that is the role you assigned me in this family, and you never once considered that the cost of me figuring it out was me rationing the medication that keeps me alive." He was silent. I could hear my mother in the background, her voice muffled, saying something I could not make out. "I want to fix this," he said. "The court will determine how it gets fixed," I said. "Warren Halstead is my attorney. You can reach him at his office on Monday." I hung up. I sat on my apartment couch with my cat, a gray tabby named Marin, curled against my leg. I checked my glucose monitor. 117. Stable. I breathed. My mother sent me a long text message 3 days later. It was 11 paragraphs. It used the word family 14 times and the word love 9 times and the word insulin 0 times. I read it once. I did not respond. Colton came to see me a week after the party. He stood in my doorway with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the floor. "I want you to know I returned the blazer Dad bought me for the party," he said. "And I told him I am not accepting any more money from him until this is resolved." I looked at him for a long time. "Sit down," I said. He sat on my couch. I made him a coffee. We talked for 2 hours. He asked me questions about my diabetes that no one in my family had asked me in 18 years. What does it feel like when your blood sugar drops? How do you know when to take insulin? Are you scared? I answered every question. When he left, he hugged me for the first time since he was 14 years old, and he said, "I am sorry I did not see it. I am sorry I did not ask." "You are asking now," I said. That is what matters. The probate court hearing took place on July 22, 2025. Martin Prescott was ordered to restore the full $31,187.84 to the trust within 60 days. He was assessed an additional $14,200 in statutory damages and court costs. The proceeds from the recovery of the Porsche were applied toward the restitution. The court referred the matter to the Chatham County District Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal charges. As of the day I am recording this, that review is still pending. My father has not spoken to me since the hearing. My mother has sent 2 more text messages, both of which I have read and neither of which I have responded to. They do not mention insulin. They do not mention the trust. They mention family and forgiveness and moving forward, as though the direction were the only thing that mattered and not the wreckage they are asking me to step over to get there. My business, Prescott Patient Advocacy, now has 31 clients. I hired my first employee in August, a woman named Gabrielle Tran, 26 years old, a former pharmacy technician who understood the system because she had been failed by it. Together we help people who are drowning in medical bills, who are being denied coverage they are entitled to, who are being told by systems and institutions, and sometimes by their own families, that they should just figure it out. I know what that feels like. I built this company because I know what that feels like. Last month, we helped a 53-year-old woman in Pooler recover $11,200 in wrongfully denied insurance claims for her son's epilepsy medication. When she called me to say the money had been deposited, she was crying so hard she could barely speak. She said, "Nobody ever fought for us before." I sat at my desk after that call and I thought about Vivian. I thought about the kitchen table in her house on East 40th Street, where she used to sit with me and show me how to read medical bills, how to match the explanation of benefits against the provider statement, how to find the errors that insurance companies count on you being too tired to catch. She was teaching me this business before I knew it was a business. She was giving me the tools to build the thing that would sustain me, when the people who were supposed to sustain me chose someone else instead. I also want to tell you about something that happened in September that I have not told anyone. I was at the pharmacy on Abercorn Street picking up my insulin, still paying out of pocket, still waiting for the court-ordered restitution to be processed. And I ran into my father. He was picking up a prescription for Catherine, he said. He looked older. His shirt was untucked. He had not shaved. He stood in the pharmacy aisle with his hands at his sides and he said, "Sloane, can we just talk, just as father and daughter?" I looked at him. I looked at this man who had taught me to ride a bicycle when I was 6, and then spent the next 23 years teaching me that I was not worth the same investment as his son. And I said, "Dad, I love you. But I cannot have a conversation with you as father and daughter while you are still refusing to have a conversation with me as trustee and beneficiary. Those are not separate things. They never were." He opened his mouth. He closed it. He nodded once. He walked away. I picked up my insulin. I paid $147.63. I drove home. I want to say something to anyone watching who recognizes this story. Not the specific details, the Porsche, the trust, the tow truck on the driveway, but the shape of it. The shape of being the one your family decided did not need help, the one they overlooked because your competence made their neglect invisible, the one who managed and adapted and figured it out until the figuring it out nearly cost you something irreplaceable. I want you to know that your ability to survive is not consent to be harmed. Your resilience is not permission for their carelessness. And the fact that you can carry something does not mean it is right for them to keep loading it onto your back. You are allowed to set it down. You are allowed to let the weight land where it belongs, on the people who created it, and you are allowed to do it calmly, precisely, and without apology. I do not hate my parents. I do not wish them harm. But I no longer wish to be the daughter they built. The one who figures it out, the one who manages, the one who makes their selfishness sustainable. I am someone else now. I am the woman who built something real in the silence they mistook for submission. And if the quietest sound in the world is a flatbed tow truck pulling a $68,000 Porsche out of a driveway full of champagne glasses and stunned faces, then I think Vivian would agree with me. Sometimes the quietest sound is the loudest one in the room. I want to end with a question, and I want you to answer it honestly in the comments. If someone in your life took from you, not because they were desperate, not because they had no other choice, but because they decided you were the one who could afford to lose, and if you had the chance to let the consequences arrive in front of everyone who had always looked the other way, would you do it? And if you already have, what did it feel like to finally stop carrying it alone? I want to know. I read every comment. Tell me. To everyone still watching, thank you. Thank you for staying until the end of this one. These stories exist because of you. Because you share them, because you save them, because you send them at 2 in the morning to the one person you know will understand. We are 3 people behind this channel, and every single day we hear from women who tell us these stories help them feel less alone. That is the entire reason we do this. If this story reminded you that being quiet is not the same as being powerless, and that the people who underestimate you have already made the only mistake that matters, then we did our job today. New stories arrive every single day on Executive Revenge Stories. Subscribe. Stay. The loudest comebacks are still being built in silence, and yours might be next. Thank you from all of us.